It is the 11th, of course, a very special day, a very poignant day. And during the First World War, like many other parts of the country, Cheshire welcomed refugees and soldiers from other countries. Many were repatriated at the end of hostilities, but sadly some died, and they were laid to rest here. A seemingly forgotten story of a Belgian refugee and servicemen and women is now being unravelled thanks to a major research project that's been undertaken by the University of Chester in the city centre there, and St Werburgh's Church, which is bang in the middle of the city, I think. BBC Radio Merseyside's Mark Gayer can tell us a little bit more. Fascinating story this, Mark, isn't it?
It certainly is, Snelly, and of course on Armistice Day, when we think about all the soldiers, of course, the Allied troops, many of whom had to come to Britain when their countries were invaded or occupied. And someone who's made a real good study of this is Dr. Hannah Ewence. She's a senior lecturer in modern history at the University of Chester. And also with me here in St Werburgh's Church in Chester, where there's a memorial, is Anne-Marie Curtis, who's from the church's Great War Study Group. So, Dr. Ewence, how many refugees came to the UK and this part of the country in particular?
Well, we think that there was probably an estimated 250,000 that came to Britain during the course of the First World War. Those that came to Chester and Cheshire more broadly, that's harder to pin down, but perhaps somewhere in the region of 1,000 to 2,000. And because Belgium was technically the reason that Britain entered the war, because Germany breached its neutrality. And was there a little flourishing Belgian community here at that time, then? Absolutely. From the very, very early stages of the war, Belgians were coming to Chester, seeking refuge, coming, of course, into Gravestone in Kent particularly, and then being dispersed all throughout the country. And Chester became quite a centre, really, in the region for receiving refugees. And, of course, sadly, on the board here in St Werburgh's, we have got the names of deceased and one soldier. And, of course, Anne-Marie, you're from the Great War Study Group, so tell us a little about what you know about him.
His name was Constant Wouters. He was born on Christmas Day 1881 in Ghent in Belgium. Sadly, he was injured during the early stages of the war, and he was evacuated on a hospital train and brought to Chester and to Richmond House, which was an auxiliary Red Cross hospital, and a lot of Belgians were sent to that hospital, Belgian troops who had been injured. The strange thing about Constant is that he seemed to be recovering very well. He arrived in October 1914, getting on fine, and then suddenly, in the end of February 1915, he succumbed to meningitis. And he was buried here, but he left a wife and family back in Belgium, and of course they couldn't come to the funeral, obviously, because the war was on, and as far as we know, they've never been to his grave. No, it was a big, almost a state funeral, with the horse-drawn hearse and a firing party over the grave in Overley Cemetery. His body lay in state here and became covered in wreaths during the during the morning of Saturday, the 13th of March. And amongst all the huge wreaths from people in Chester, there was one wreath of violets sent by his wife back in Belgium. And each year, his grave, you do go, I mean, Father here has been to the grave to bless it. Yes, every November we do remember our dead family, and for the last 2 Novembers, Father Paul Shaw of St Werburgh's has been to Overley Cemetery to bless the war graves, including that of Constant Wouters, and he'll be going in a fortnight's time to do the same. And you've not found any of his relatives so far? Not at all. No. Not at all. We always hope they will contact, but no. Now, Dr. Ewens, this is a part of your studies, part of wider research about refugee minorities during war in the UK. So just how interesting is it? Well, this is a fascinating history, and I think particularly for the county of Cheshire, which we often think about as somewhat of a monocultural county compared to the much more diverse places of Liverpool, Manchester, close by. But of course there were all kinds of different minority groups here during the war, both serving in the armed forces and also as refugees, as prisoners of war as well. So it's an incredibly important study, giving us the opportunity to uncover this. And you'd like people, if they've got stories, if they remember growing up and seeing troops from or people from
countries involved, refugees coming here, to get in touch? And how can they do that and let you know?
They can do that through our website, which is www.diversenarratives.com, and that's connected to the University of Chester's research on this.
And from what you know, at the outset, we mentioned all the Belgian refugees, maybe 1,500 to 2,000 settling in the Chester area. Did most of them go back home when the war was over?
Yes, we think 90-95% returned home. In fact, many were returning even by 1916, but the British government were actually quite keen for them to return, and so paid for them to be repatriated by 1919-1920. But we would love to hear stories if people knew about refugees who perhaps married local men, local women, had families, those people that remained. That would be wonderful to hear stories of that.
So there might be a bit of Belgium in Chester.
Quite possibly.
As well. And finally to Anne-Marie Curtis, you have this Great War Study Group, but I suppose even though the relatives back in Belgium with their own descendants won't know it, but it's nice, perhaps it's warming to know that even though they were many miles from home in a torrid time in European history, that they are remembered every year here in Chester.
Yes, if it was one of my relations, I'd be very pleased to know that his grave was being attended each November.
So there we are. It's Armistice Day today, and of course we will come to a stop today, the 11th hour, the 11th day, and to remember those people who died. And here in Chester, they will also be remembering those people from many, many places who came here as a result of that war and never went home.
Indeed, Mark. Thank you very much indeed.